Hi, Liz here from Tutor to You. This video is for students of the AAQ BTEC National in Health and Social Care, and it's a walkthrough of the exam for Unit 2 Human Biology and Health. The Unit 2 exam is 1.5 hours long, and there are a total of 80 marks available. The exam paper itself is split into 3 sections. Each section is broadly thematic, so what I mean by that is all of the questions in section 1 could be linked to the respiratory system, and then section 2 linked to another body system, and so on. Each section has a mixture of question types, so you might have short answer questions, short open response questions, and finishing with the extended open response questions, and I'll go through each of those in turn. The extended open response questions do have a scenario which provides the context for those questions. So here are the command words in use for each of the question types. So your short answer questions are called that because they literally have 1 or 2 word answers, sometimes a very brief sentence. So you've got the command words identify, give, name or label, and state. Your short open response questions are where you're writing in fuller sentences. So the command words here are explain and describe. And then for your extended open response questions, which are written in sentences and paragraphs, almost like a mini essay, the command words there are discuss and evaluate. So let's have a look at those in more detail. Identify is the command word used for multiple choice questions. And these questions are always worth 1 mark. So you're asked to identify one thing from a list of 4 possible options. There'll most likely be 3 of these on every paper as the first question of each section. The assessment outcome being tested here is AO1, and the focus in AO1 is about recalling facts from the unit. And this is the wording of assessment outcome 1. It's demonstrate knowledge of the structure, organisation and function of the human body and common disorders that affect it. So let's have a look at an example identify question. So identify one type of muscle tissue for 1 mark. You're given 4 options to choose from: epithelial, adipose, striated and glial, and you have to decide which one is the correct one, which you indicate with an X in the box. And striated is the only muscle tissue type there, so you'd get 1 mark. So expect 3 of these on your paper. Next, let's have a look at give, name, label and state. So these are those short answer questions. So you're writing 1 or 2 words, maybe a brief sentence as your response. These will be worth 1, 2, 3 or possibly 4 marks, depending on how many items you're asked to give, name or label or state. You can expect around 10 marks on the paper in total to be given over to these types of questions. And the assessment outcome again is AO1, so it's about recalling facts. So it's about demonstrating your knowledge of the unit. Here's an example of a give question. Give the key term for the process by which cells derive energy from glucose through catabolism for 1 mark. So you need to give a key term. So that's the definition. What is the key term for this? And it's cellular respiration. So you literally write your key term and you get 1 mark. There are a few name or label questions on the paper, probably 2 or 3, and this is your chance to use your knowledge in a slightly different way. So you're given an image or a figure to look at. It tells you which structures on the image it wants you to name or label. So our question here is name the structures labelled A, B, C and D on the diagram. Because you're being asked for 4, you are given 4 marks if you get them all right. So this is the female reproductive system that I can see in front of me. So I know that A is the ovary, so that would give me a mark. B is the fallopian tube, and that would get me another mark. C is the uterus for another mark, and then D is the vagina for the 4th mark. Really like these questions. Okay, so the next command word is state. So this example is state the 2 divisions of the autonomic nervous system for 2 marks. So in this case, we are given an answer space that's labelled 1 and 2. So we know this is helping us out that we need to give 2 parts to our answer. So we need to know what is the autonomic nervous system split into. I know it's split into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems or divisions, which will get me my 2 marks. So how do we ensure that we're successful in these short answer questions? Well, I've got some ideas for you here. You really need a thorough knowledge of the unit. So there is a lot of factual information that you need to make sure you know. The best way to do this is through your learning in your lessons and then revision and retrieval. So keep practicing retrieving this knowledge. Tutor2 do a fantastic set of revision question cards for this unit, and I really recommend them for getting your brain in gear, remembering all these factual pieces of information. But you also need to carefully read the question, because you need to select the right piece of information from your brain, from your knowledge base. So you need to be able to read a question and very quickly work out, this is about cellular respiration, or this is about gas exchange, or this is about the cardiac cycle. So you need to really zero in on that as quickly as you can. And you need to be accurate and precise in these answers. You're given a small amount of space on your paper to give your answer, so you need to get straight in there. If it says name, have you named something? If it says state 3, have you stated 3 of something? And is it relevant and appropriate to the context? And by that I mean the context of the question, so the topic area that it's flagging to you. You really need to have really good grasp of key terms, key technical terms in this unit. So make sure you've got a glossary of key terms. There is a Tutor2 one available for free. I also recommend that when you do your revision, you revise your key terms, and a really nice way to do this is to expand your glossary so that you are using each of those keywords in a sentence. So if we use our key technical terms, it shows our great knowledge and understanding to the examiner. It also makes our accuracy and precision better, because we are being more accurate if we use the correct key technical term, and also it helps us to be more concise, because technical terms generally take the place of lots of waffle. So replace your waffle with key technical terms, especially important in this science-based unit. Okay, so now we're going to move on to explain. Explain is one of the command words used for the short open response questions. So these are short answers, but they are written in full sentences, and usually you're looking at a minimum of 2 sentences per answer, depending on how much detail you're being asked to give. So the questions are worth 2, 3 or 4 marks, and this depends on how many things you're asked to explain. So if you're just asked to explain gas exchange, then that might be 2 or 3 marks. But if you're asked to explain 2 causes of COPD, for example, that would be 4 marks, okay? There are as many as 10 of these questions on every paper. You can expect around 34 marks to be allocated in total to explain questions, so it's super important that you're really good at this, because that is a lot of marks to be gained or lost. The assessment outcomes being tested here are AO1 and AO2, and in some cases AO3. So if I just talk you through those briefly. So AO1, you know, is demonstrating your knowledge. AO2 is also about understanding. So knowledge and understanding of structure, organisation and function of the human body and common disorders. Then AO3 is about application. So demonstrate application of knowledge and understanding of the structure and function of body systems to the primary and secondary effects of common disorders on those body systems. So application means that you can use your knowledge that you've been taught in one area and apply it to other areas, okay? So a really good technique for this is the what, so what technique. And if you've already seen our paper 1 walkthrough and you're familiar with our resources, you'll know about this technique already. Great news is it can be applied to Unit 2 as well. So for 2-mark explain questions, you must make a point and then expand that to a full answer that shows reasoning. And what I mean by that is reasoning is explaining what, how or why, and sometimes in this unit as well, when something happens, okay? So you use the what, so what technique for this. So first of all, make your point. So what is your point? That gets you the 1st mark. And then you need to expand that with a so what or how or why that this can be explained for your 2nd mark. If you've got a 4-mark explain question where you're asked to explain 2 items, so for example, explain the role of the liver and the pancreas in blood glucose regulation, you need to do that process twice. So you do what, so what on the 1st item you're explaining, and then what, so what on the 2nd item you're explaining. So where things are a little bit different is your 3-mark explain questions. In this case, I want you to repeat the so what twice. So this is a little bit different from your Unit 1 technique. So you do a what is your point, and then so what, how or why for the 1st time, and then so what, how or why for the 2nd time. The reason that these questions are a what, so what, so what is because in science there's often two so whats, or maybe even more. Okay, so there's this thing and then these two things happen as a result. Okay, let's have a look at an example question. Explain how smoking causes chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, for 3 marks. So we've got an explain question. We're asked to explain one thing, so how smoking causes COPD, but there are 3 marks available. So we are going to do a what, so what, so what. So we need to have 3 parts to our answer. So here is my answer, and what I've done is I've put each new part of the answer onto a new line. So my first point, my what: chemicals in cigarette smoke damage the lining of the airways and the alveoli in the lungs. So that's what smoking does. Now I need to fully explain how or why that leads to COPD. So for my second mark, this leads to inflammation and scarring, narrowing the airways and reducing the surface area for gas exchange. And then my second so what: as a result, breathing becomes more difficult over time, causing long-term symptoms like shortness of breath and coughing. So I have fully explained with this answer how smoking causes COPD, and I've made 3 kind of elements to my answer, so I get the 3 marks. We also have on Unit 2 describe questions, and we don't have these on Unit 1, so let me talk you through them. So again, this is for your short open response questions where we're writing in sentences. These questions are usually worth 3 marks. There'll be 2 or 3 of them on the paper, so we're only looking at 6 to 9 marks here. But still, 9 marks could make a huge difference to your overall grade, so they're not to be sniffed at. Again, the AOs we're looking at are 1, 2, and in some cases 3. So remember, that's your knowledge and understanding and then your application. So I recommend for these a 3-step technique: 3 marks, 3 steps. So you have to pay attention to your description. So make sure you're giving sufficient detail to clearly describe the steps of the process. So this command word describe is often for a process or a mechanism that happens in the body. Because it's about mechanisms and processes, you really need to pay attention to the sequencing. So you need to have a clear and accurate sequence demonstrated in your response. So that means, for example, starting at the beginning of the process or the resting point of a physiological action, moving it through the middle and then taking it to the end. So just use a 3-step technique. Make sure you give the beginning of the process or your first descriptive point, the middle of the process, which is your second descriptive point, and then the end of the process for your third descriptive point. If you're not sure whether you're being asked to describe a process, maybe you're being asked to describe a function, think about how you could break it down into 3. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 for 1, 2, 3 marks. So let's have a look at an example. This one is describe the role of the central nervous system, which sometimes we refer to as the CNS, for 3 marks. So I'm going to use that 3-step technique. So I've put my 3 parts into 3 separate sentences on different lines. So first part: central nervous system, made up of the brain and spinal cord, receives information from the sensory receptors in the body. Then my middle point: the brain processes this information and decides on the appropriate response. And then my final point, or my end point: the spinal cord then sends messages to effectors, such as muscles or glands, to carry out the response. So although when you read that question, describe the role, you're thinking, well, is that a process? Actually, the role of the CNS can be described in a 3-step process. Okay, so if you wrote an answer similar to this, you would get 3 marks. So how can we ensure we're successful in these short open response questions? So I explain and describe. We need to thoroughly know the content of the unit. This means paying attention in class, doing your bit in the classroom, but also out of the classroom. You need to do your revision. You need to do interleaving, which means revisiting topics. Don't just forget about cells because that was at the beginning of term. Revisit it often. You need to make sure that you know exactly what could come up. So anything in the specification could be tested. So make sure you've got a copy of the specification. Make sure you've got a revision checklist. Be really methodical about all of this knowledge. You need to carefully read those questions so you select the right information from that knowledge in your brain. You need to be accurate and precise. So have you explained or have you described? And is what you say on topic? So have you zeroed in on the exact precise area of knowledge that you need to be talking about here? That's what I mean by relevance and appropriateness to the context. You need to use those key technical terms, those scientific terms, that scientific language throughout your responses, because it shows your knowledge and understanding. And as I said before, it helps you to be accurate and precise and concise as well, which, you know, is a big part of answering an exam paper well. You need to use your reasoning. So if you are explaining, you need to explain how, what, or why something happens or is important or is required, and you can use that what, so what technique. And then if you're describing, you need to give attention to detail, to your accurate sequencing. Use that 3-step technique. Make sure you've given sufficient detail to fully describe. So finally, we've got discuss and evaluate. So just 2 command words for the 9-mark questions on this paper. They're always going to be worth 9 marks. You're probably going to have 3, and it will probably be the last question in each paper. That means there's 27 marks available for these, which is a lot of marks, so we want to gain as many of them as we can. The assessment outcomes being tested in these questions is AO3 and AO4. So AO3, as I've already explained to you, is your application of your knowledge. And then AO4 for this unit is about making connections. So making connections between primary and secondary effects of common disorders and how they affect interlinked body systems. So we might tend to think about disorders in relation to the body system that they affect first. So we might think, well, heart attack's all about the cardiovascular system. And it is, that's where it originates. However, coronary heart disease affects multiple systems throughout your body, okay? So it's about knowing not just how it affects where it originates, but all the cascade of effects on the whole body. Our bodies are amazing things, and all the organ systems within our body work in harmony with one another. So to answer these questions, just like on Unit 1, we can use what, so what, now what as our technique. So 9-mark questions, we have to be writing in paragraphs. We need to link our paragraphs to each other. So we need to logically develop our discussion or our evaluation, and we need to make sure we have given a clear answer to the question. So the what, so what, now what technique. So the what part of it, that's all the relevant facts and aspects of the topic. The so what or how or why is how do they apply to the context. So you will be given a scenario for a 9-mark question, and I'll show you an example in a moment. So what is significant about those facts and aspects of the topic? How do they interrelate? What are the connections between them? And then you need to think about the now what. So that's the impact, the influence, or the change. So what's the final result of all this? And if it's evaluate, you do need to have a conclusion. So I think it's no bad thing to have a conclusion for a discuss question. If you don't put one in, you're not going to lose marks or anything like that. But having it there really does make you reflect on whether you've actually answered the question. So it's not a long, detailed conclusion. It is literally now, let's state my answer, my final answer to the question. So, as I said, you will get a scenario for the 9-mark questions, and they are always going to be about a disorder, okay? So you need to think about all of those disorders on the specification in terms of these 9-mark questions. So the scenario we have here, Sadiq was recently admitted to hospital with chest pain. He is diagnosed with coronary heart disease, or CHD. The question says, discuss how coronary heart disease may affect the functioning of Sadiq's cardiovascular system and other body systems, for 9 marks. In the specification, it actually tells us which body systems we should be thinking about in relation to which diseases. So you need to be really familiar with that specification. We've got some fantastic handouts on disorders of the body, which are free on the Tutor2U website, and they go through all of these interlinking effects and interconnections and the body systems affected by each disorder. So make sure you've got those, and that's part of your revision. So for the answer, I've put it in a grid that splits it out into what, so what, now what. It'd be a really good idea for you to pause the video now and have a good read of this. Also, of course, you can come back and watch the video again later. It's also quite small, I appreciate that, so it might be a little bit tricky on your phone. So have a look at that. So when you read this, you will see that in the what part, I have stated all the facts and aspects about this topic that I know of. So everything I know about how CHD affects the cardiovascular system and then other body systems. So I've talked about what CHD is and the effects of it, so the primary effects on the cardiovascular system. Then I've also linked to the respiratory system and the digestive system, because those are listed in the specification as the systems that I need to be paying attention to. Then in my so what, I'm thinking about, well, why is this important? What is relevant? So I'm then doing my interlinks. So I'm saying if the heart can't pump properly, it puts pressure on the lungs. If the lungs can't deliver enough oxygen to the body, then the heart gets weaker. If the digestive system is not being perfused with blood, then it might not work as well. So we're not getting as our nutrition is impacted. So I'm talking about how cardiovascular disease affects all these body systems separately, but then the cumulative effect is to make someone even more poorly. And then my now what is I'm kind of drawing it all together and saying, you know, this is my final answer. And I say that it affects other organ systems, puts stress on other systems. They all work together. So if one fails, it causes a chain reaction. So that's a really nice way of answering a discuss question. So how do we make sure we're successful in these questions? Well, it's the same things that I've been saying throughout, okay? So thorough knowledge, careful reading, selecting the right information, being accurate and precise, using your key terms, using reasoning. So although our discuss and evaluate aren't specifically telling us we have to explain, we do need to explain in order to be able to discuss and to evaluate something. We have to have logical answers, so we have to develop them over the course of our response. We need to write nice paragraphs that link to one another and show connections and interrelationships between everything we know about the human body. So from the cells through cellular respiration, gas exchange, homeostasis, right through to all the body systems and then the disorders. It's all interlinked, and you need to show some of that in your answer. Make sure you show balance in these answers. You'll always be asked to look at least 2 body systems and how they're affected. So if you've got 2, make sure you're balancing out the 2 in your response. If you've got 3, make sure you're balancing out the 3, okay? Don't just heavily focus on one, because then you're going to limit yourself. In evaluate, make sure you reach a conclusion, but as I said before, no harm in having one in your discuss question. And remember, what, so what, now what, that will give you the confidence to write a really nice answer to these questions. Okay, so that's the end of our walkthrough of the Unit 2 exam paper. I hope you enjoyed it and found it useful. Good luck with your exams.